Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Directing on Set. Specifically, this is focused on the element of directing that has to do with the day of the shoot itself. As a director, you will have to do a lot of pre-production, a lot of meetings, a lot of organizing, assembling props, craft services, all those things. But today is going to be about specifically that one single day. I want to be clear that this is going to be, a lot of this is general, but we are specifically going to be talking about directing on a Charm City set. So for those of you who've been on other sets, this might be a little bit different, though hopefully quite a bit familiar. For first-time directors in Charm City, you get 1 day. Explicitly, that works out to 12 hours. So let me take you through those 12 hours. I have got a screen shot. Oh, wait, it's already set up. Come on. All right, hopefully you guys can see that. Let me mess it up just a little bit bigger because you know what? I deserve to be bigger. All right, nope. They're not letting me get it. All right, screw it, that's fine. Huh. Nah. Okay, I'm gonna let it go. Okay. Now, before I get into the times of this specifically, I do want to be clear that the times I'm putting here is sort of a generic shooting schedule. We have certainly done shoots where they have to shoot all night, and if that's the case, then the schedule will shift accordingly. We've certainly done some shoots where some of it had to be during the day, some of it had to be at night, so it would straddle dusk, as it were. Having said that, if your shoot's going to be an all-day shoot, especially if it's going to be an outdoor shoot and it needs to be during the day, then this is going to be a pretty typical schedule. Pretty much 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is pretty much the standard. So let me take you through it. All right, first things first, you are the director and most likely going to be the location scout, which means that you will be the person who called up, Bill, again, an imaginary Bill, and talked Bill into letting us use your house, his house, letting him use his house, which means that you need to be the first one there. You need to be there before anybody else because at some point, Bill is going to be invaded by a small army. And unless they have experience with that, unless they have experience with that, that's going to kind of freak them out a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like they're going to completely, but nevertheless, you need to be there first. If it's a business or like a national park or something like that, then again, you need to make sure that you're there first so that you can talk to the owner or whoever, get the key, whatever is necessary before anybody else shows up. You don't have to be crazy early. No one's going to get there before 7, but you do need to be there, a few minutes before that. Be aware of that. And yes, definitely touch base with the location. Make sure that they're good. Okay, 7 a.m. 7 a.m. rolls around and the crew is going to start showing up. No, they will not all show up at the same time. And yes, people are going to be a few minutes late. That's the nature of it. But most of the regular crew, the crew that you're going to be working with, have been on a few sets before. They're going to already know what they're going to do. So for example, your cinematographer shows up. He or she's going to start unloading, the van, sound gear, first AD, everyone's going to start bringing in the equipment. As other people show up who don't have their own equipment to bring, like PAs or just other general help, then they will also sort of work in. Specifically, what they're doing is they're bringing all the equipment they're going to be using for the day, ideally, and putting it in a staging area. Let me stop for a second and talk about the staging area because actually it's really, really important. The idea, in a different lesson on a different class, is that during the pre-production, you should have visited the location at least once ahead of time with your cinematographer and ideally with your first AD. And one of the things you'll do when you're there, not just looking at the place, ooh, look how cool it is, you will consciously ahead of time pick a space, ideally an entire room, where all the equipment can be set up. This is a room that you are not going to film in. This is a room that no one else is going to mess with. And ideally, hopefully, it's a room that's inside. Outdoor shoots need to be a little bit more careful. We have certainly had shoots where people have put their stuff on the side of the street and come back and not all that equipment was still there. Point is, you have to set up a staging area ahead of time. And at that point, on the morning of the shoot, both your cinematographer and your first AD should already know, oh yeah, everything goes into the dining room kind of thing. So during this first half hour, all hands on deck is going to be stuff coming out of the cars, out of the vans, and going into the dining room to be staged so it can be used later. Having a stage area ahead of time is going to make that whole process much simpler and much smoother. You definitely want to pick that ahead of time. It's also at this time that craft services get set up. The way we are currently running the films, the director, yes, again, you, in addition to bringing all the props and costumes that we're going to need, you're also going to be getting craft services. So that means when you roll up, you will have a trunk full of chips and soda and drink and plates and whatever else is craft services, wherever else you set up for snacks. Again, there'll be hands, they'll pull that out, they'll set aside a table, they'll start putting up. And then, by the way, that comes sort of back around to that pre-production meeting, that pre-production walkthrough. In addition to a staging area, you also need to set up another space, ideally for what we call the green room, basically where you're going to put craft services. This also needs to be a room that you're not filming in. Ideally, what this space should be is for the actors and the crew that aren't specifically engaged in anything. As you see, when we start moving through this schedule, there's going to be a lot of hurry up and wait for certain members of the cast, certain members of the cast, certain members of the crew. They will have whole chunks of period of time. For some of your cast, especially if they're in a smaller part, they may have to sit there for 3 or 4 hours before they'll get called on. You want to make sure they have a place to go hang out. I promise those people will be a little bit more understanding and a lot more patient if they've got a room to the side where they can go, they can sit down, they can snack on some stuff and talk to a fellow actor who's also not being called on this moment. They can run lines, they can be productive. If you do not have a space set aside, in a completely different room, then you're going to run the risk of, now they have to sit in a corner and they have to make sure not to talk while you're filming, and it's just not going to be the same. So ideally, again, both the staging area and the green room are completely separate rooms, hopefully. Okay. At that point, now we start moving through. Hopefully by 7:30, most of the food, the equipment has all been loaded in the proper rooms. So at this point, first AD will make sure that your first scene gets dressed. Like, okay, we're going to start in the living room. Let's make sure the living room is where it needs to be. Or that's already been dressed, whatever, but you got to get that dressed. At that point, also, you're going to start getting camera and lights starting to set up. Let me go ahead and give you a preview of coming attractions. You will see that camera and lights setting up is going to always be a big part of your day. Obviously, different situations come up and different problems and so on and so forth, but as a general rule of thumb, the thing that takes the most time, most of the time, will be setting up cameras and lights. Every time you have to pick up the cameras and lights and move to a different room or move the camera to a reverse shot, any of those things are going to take time. And I know that you only have so much time, and I know that it can be a very frustrating experience, but I promise you, you're going to want to give your cinematographer as much time as they need to set it up right. Your film will look gorgeous. You will thank them for it later. You just have to understand it's going to take time, and that's part of your job as the director, head of logistics, is to make sure that that's done as smoothly as possible. But again, it just is going to take time. By the way, quick aside here, since I'm here, I do want to say that, like, if you do actually choose to do an outdoor shoot, or you're doing an outdoor shoot, some of these things will change. One of the nice, better things, upsides to shooting outside, is that you spend a lot less time setting up lights, because usually your primary source of light is the sun, and even if you're using a couple of bounce cards, that ends up being a lot faster than it would be otherwise. So just part of the metric. Okay. So camera and lights, they'll get started. Believe me, cinematographer knows they're the ones that take time. And so I promise that as soon as possible, the cinematographer is going to start doing their thing. That's all good. They know what they're doing. By 8 o'clock, now at 8 o'clock, at this point, the actors should show up. Let me say that if you have a main actor who you're going to be using all day, then you definitely want them to show up now if you're at 8 o'clock, and you want to make sure you have them. If you do have actors that are going to be like, maybe you have a crowd scene or something where you need a whole bunch of extras for one particular scene, you might consciously choose to schedule that at like after lunch or something like that. And so in that case, those actors in that scene wouldn't have a call time of 8 o'clock. They'd have a call time of, 1:30 or 2 o'clock or whatever. So I don't want to think that all actors have to show up at 8. And in fact, if you know that you are not going to be filming a particular actor in the morning, having them show up in the morning is just, it's rude, it's unnecessary, don't do that. I would definitely recommend talking to your first AD to make sure that that can be coordinated properly. The only thing worse than having an actor stay all day is needing an actor from the scene right now and they're not there. So that is a bit of a balancing act, but just again, be aware they don't have to actually show up at 8. If they're an all-day actor or they're part of the morning scene, then indeed 8 o'clock is when they need to show up. Actors show up at 8. Most actors are usually punctual, maybe more punctual than the crew. That's okay though. It all works out. If the actors have makeup or costuming, they need to get into that for whatever the first scene they're going to be in is for, and that will take a bit of time, so they'll go through that thing. All right. Again, during all this time, camera and lights are being set up. First AD usually pulls the director side at this point, starts, walking through that first scene, so that can be sort of clear. By about 9:30 or so this should be about 2 hours of setup, give or take. Cameras and lights should be almost done at this point. Usually when you're a few minutes away from getting ready to go, you'll bring the actors out in full costume and makeup, have them go through some blocking rehearsals. Let me say this about blocking rehearsals since we're here. I know that there are some directors who like to do a lot of blocking rehearsals early, and for the more complicated stuff, coordinated fight scenes, dance scenes, whatever, that certainly works. I will say though that sort of like, hey, I need to get up and then walk around the couch and say something. A lot of that is honestly easier to set up once everything's ready to go. And no disrespect to camera and lights, you'll have the time. Since camera lights are going to take enough time, especially for this first scene, you will have 15, 20 minutes or whatever, depending on how long you want to start, to actually move the actors through this scene. I will say that even if your actors know exactly what to do, you are still going to want to do a blocking rehearsal at this point, if for no other reason than to make it really obvious to both the cinematographer and the sound engineer where the actors are going to be, right? If the actor's going to stand up, walk around the couch, and then lean in and say something, the cinematographer needs to know that. So if it's a tracking shot, they'll track with it, or walk in and out of a light or whatever. And then the sound engineer is also going to need to know that so that the microphone is pointed at the right place. So since you're going to have to do a blocking rehearsal for the crew, at least, so they can see it, you might as well go ahead and leave that for the actors too. Again, barring a more complicated choreography. Certainly if you're doing like a big, huge fight scene, that has to be planned and planned and planned and planned. But by the way, if you do have choreography and you do a lot of that, I would recommend that at least one of those, maybe the last one, make sure that your cinematographer is there so that he or she can see that, oh, okay, there's going to be this roll and the guy will like end in this back kick or whatever. And so the camera can capture that action appropriately. So the cinematographer can already start planning out, how am I going to capture this complicated moment kind of thing. Finally, 10 a.m. rolls around and cameras start rolling. Usually at this point, first-time directors are like, oh my God, I can't believe we haven't started filming yet. And usually me, experienced first AD is going, 10 a.m., that's not bad. We're doing pretty good. Seriously, it's going to take a while for everybody to get into the groove. I have had shoots that started as early as 9:30, but I don't think I've ever started rolling before then. This just will take time. People have to kind of get all in the moment. Now, the good news is this will speed up. People will become more fluid and more together as the day goes on, but that first setup is usually complicated. Unfortunately, it's part of the process. I will actually honestly add to that and say that as first AD, I generally strongly recommend that you want to make your first scene not necessarily super complicated, but certainly a little involved. You know, maybe with all your main actors in some sort of big wide shot, so that everyone can kind of get, you know, again, sort of like get into the rhythm of the piece itself. If you start with something where it's like a camera on one actor talking into the wind, you know, they'll give that actor a little warmed up, but I don't know how much they'll get everyone else ready to go. Since I'm on the talk, I want to say one last thing and then I'm going to move on. Another thing I recommend in terms of getting actors and the crew and cast ready to go is to start with wide shots. Your general shot where you're sort of taking in the whole room, that will be something that you will be able to use to cut back and forth during your edit. And in a way, it's sort of a final dress rehearsal. The actors are now much more comfortable with the scene. And so that when you move from that to the close-ups, which you're going to be using most of your actual film is going to be the close-ups, your actors have really dialed it in and everyone knows exactly what they're doing, and it will be a more powerful performance for it. Okay, 10 o'clock, cameras are rolling. Oh, thank God, here we go. Okay, cameras will roll for about another 2.5 hours or so. Now at about 12:30-ish, your first AD will pull you aside for just a second, maybe while the camera's setting up or something, and go, okay, lunch is coming. You need to decide a stopping point. The first AD will then make sure that someone, by the way, as the director, you'll have picked out lunch ahead of time. Okay, we're doing subs. Oh, we're getting catering. Oh, whatever. You've already worked that ahead of time. So the first AD knows, okay, and they'll send a PA to call up, you know, the local Sabaros, and they'll drive out and pick it up and bring it back. What you need to know as the director at this point is, okay, when should I stop? You know, and that depends on exactly where you are in the shoot. If you're just about to wrap up in this room, but it's going to take about another hour, then you take the hour, you wrap in the room, and then you call lunch. If you've only got 15 more minutes of stuff to do, and then you're going to change cameras and lights or whatever, then maybe you'll call it at 15 minutes. The idea is, since you're going to have to stop for lunch anyway, and then reset up afterwards, it makes a really good sense to make sure that your stopping point is a natural break where you were going to move the cameras and lighting anyway. So why not take advantage of it? Which, by the way, does mean that lunch will not necessarily happen at 1 o'clock. That's certainly ideal, but don't expect it. Don't expect it. If it happens a little earlier, a little bit later, that's fine. It just has to midday. And again, if this was like even the middle of the night, you would still have a mid lunch in the middle of the shoot. That's just kind of how that goes. Okay, 1 o'clock lunch, everybody sits down. Yes, that means you too. Please make sure you eat. I don't know how many times I've been on set as first AD having to like follow the director around with a plate of food because they won't eat. Eat. You need your strength. And this is the only time during the entire day that you are going to get 15 minutes to sit down and eat and talk. You're really going to want to take advantage of it because by 1:30, while most of the crew and cast are now, this is so good, I love this. You've eaten your lunch fast. Your cinematographer will have eaten his or her lunch fast as too. I promise, I've seen it. And by 1:30, the cinematographer and gaffer and crew, visual crew, are already setting up the cameras and lights for the next scene because, again, they know it's going to take time. By the way, I would always recommend a fair amount of patience on that. Cinematographers are not idiots. They are well aware of the fact that they are the slow one that everybody else is waiting on. But at the same time, they're not going to rush. They know what they're doing. Let them do what their thing. Try to give them as much support as possible. Generally, your first AD is going to run back and forth. I always see my job as first AD at this point to kind of like just make sure that whatever is currently the slowest thing is getting as much help and support as possible. So as a director, you don't need to worry about that as much. Cinematographer is going slow because they need some more hands. The first AD will make sure they get those hands or whatever they need to do their thing. Okay, about 2 o'clock, most of the rest of cast and crew, those who are not actually necessarily needed for something in terms of lighting, setting up the cameras and lights, they will then finish their lunch. Lights and cameras should be nearly ready. Actors will run through a blocking rehearsal, again, just like you did first thing in the morning. And then of course, hopefully cameras will start rolling shortly thereafter. Okay, here we go. The cameras really, really need to stop running at 7 o'clock. It has been the case on almost every set I've been on that right around 5 or 5:30-ish, the director's taking a look at their notes and going, oh my God, we're behind or whatever. And then people will speed up, they'll be a little bit more efficient. You'll end up, maybe you cut off this scene or this moment or this angle because you just don't have time. But then at 7, the cameras really, really need to stop rolling. Aside from the fact that you don't want to push your crew and your cast, come on. But beyond that, there's a very good chance that you're at a location and that location is really wanting you to leave at this point. I have been on a lot, been to a lot of houses. Some people are good with being a location, some people are not. But even the ones that are like, hey, yes, of course, use our home. We loved it. Do it again. At some point after about 12, 13 hours, they're like, okay, you need to, I want my house back. I want my couch to be turned back over. I want to be able to sit down and eat eat dinner or whatever. So 7 o'clock cameras stop. Boom, that's it. You're done. Now, I will say that of all the things that happens during this day, usually one of the things that is the fastest, one of the things that just goes really, 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 really quick is the breakdown. Cameras start rolling, sets are struck. Any props or costumes that we're going to want to keep get collected. Equipment gets loaded back into the appropriate vehicles. Let me say this about that, and this is actually a little bit less for directors and more for just anyone on set. Yes, we want to wrap fast. Yes, I love the fact that you're willing to help out. Please help out. But you need to make sure that if you pick up a piece of equipment, you need to make sure that the person who owns that equipment is aware that you picked it up. Do you know what I mean? Generally speaking, the person who's going to have the most equipment is going to be the cinematographer. By all means, go, hey, cinematographer, where do you want this light pole? That's great. Do that. That's fantastic. But don't pick up the light pole and put it in the van without, you know what I mean? Because then the cinematographer might later be looking, where's my damn light pole? I didn't see it get put away. So please be helpful. Please do everything you can to help that break down faster, but you've got to make sure that it goes in the right place. Some things that maybe are not quite as serious, like if it's trash, obviously you can just throw it away. If it's craft services, that's going to be a little bit different. But some of that equipment can be very, very expensive. And again, they want the help, they appreciate the help, but they must always be aware of what you're picking up and moving around if you're picking up and moving stuff around. Now, that's general cool. Let me go back to specific to just directors. You are also going to have a fair amount of stuff. You will have all the costumes you brought, all the props you bought, craft services, all that stuff. Now, some of those props may be one-time only use things, and they are now officially trash. I don't know, maybe it's a whatever paperwork, whatever you did. Some of that is going to be stuff that you are going to need to return. Some of it's going to be stuff that you're going to want to keep. Make sure that you get all your stuff. That's really what you need to be doing as director, is making sure that all the stuff that you want to bring with you is being dealt with. Maybe you're not the one picking it up and putting it in your car, but again, you're seeing somebody else pick it up and put it in your car, so those things get put away. Speaking of craft services, let me say this about craft services. It is usually the case, unless you brought nowhere near enough craft services, there's going to be stuff left over. Some things are going to be popular, some things are not going to be popular. By all means, take that food home with you, give it to hungry children. I'm sorry, let me say this about craft services. What has been the tradition, please don't feel like you have to do this at all, but I will say that as the person who runs the weekly meetings, for those of you who have been to the in-person weekly meetings, I will say that I usually collect food. I give out snacks during those meetings. So yet another reason that COVID has robbed us of snacks. So if you want to give all the non-perishable like chips, sodas, so on and so forth, by all means, please do. That's very much appreciated. But otherwise, it all has to go. It all has to go. So once all the equipment, all the tools, all the food, everything gets loaded away, what you need to do, first AD will usually help you with this, is you just make sure you go around and the location got put back in the order it does. Oftentimes, when we go in and shoot, like say it's someone's living room or something like that, we will very, very often go and end up moving furniture around. Sometimes, okay, no, this couch doesn't belong here. No, we'll just, boom, put it in another room. As long as location is okay with that, that's fine. But that, of course, does mean at the end of the day, the couch needs to be put back in place. What I would actually recommend as an extra thing, if you want to take it one step further, especially if you're really concerned about having a good relationship with this location, is maybe going in and taking a picture first thing in the morning. Just, like remember where that painting got hung. Sometimes people will take them down or move them around. All that's fine. Just make sure you put everything back in place as it was. And then, of course, all the trash is picked up. That's that final super location. By the way, this has not been clear in the past before, so I want to add this. As the director, it is your responsibility to make sure the trash is taken off premise. I would show up with a couple bags. Usually as first AD, I do show up with a couple of trash bags. Just make sure that those are taken with you. Leaving them at the location is not, well, all right. If the location explicitly says, hey, don't worry about it, you can just leave that trash there, then say thank you, and it's fine. But unless they say otherwise, the default is that you are not only responsible for taking everything out and putting all the appropriate stuff back, but also making sure that any trash we generate during the shoot is properly disposed of. Everybody clear on that? Okay. So that, again, is going to be the final day. A couple of bookkeeping notes. Let's wrap on this. So at the end of the day, you will now have video that your cinematographer will have and audio that your sound engineer will have. Generally speaking, with the sound engineer, it's actually usually pretty straightforward. What we usually do is just have them share the files after the fact. Audio files, even from an entire day of shooting, usually ends up being relatively small. So maybe like Google Drive or something like that. That's not usually a problem. The video can be a little bit more complicated. If you are shooting in 4K, and I will say that more and more and more we are shooting in 4K, those files end up being huge. And it's not that Google Drive necessarily can't handle them, it's just that it will, I know we did one once where Ed, the cinematographer on thing, that ended up to upload all the video files for that day of shooting was going to take something on the order of 46, 47, 48 hours of just the computer uploading that entire time. That's just not going to work. What I would recommend is that you work out a deal ahead of time with your cinematographer about transferring the memory. That can be anything from you personally buying the micro SD cards or whatever memory that the camera uses and making sure that that cinematographer uses your memory sticks, not their memory sticks, so that you can just take them home at the end of the day. If you're willing to do that, that's obviously going to be nice. I do want to point out though, if you do that, you must make sure that the memory cards you're getting are not just the micro SD format, but also have the right speed. Again, with a higher 4K format, higher 4K resolution videos, the micro SD cards don't just need to be big, but they need to be fast. Different cards will have different transfer speeds. Again, if you're going to do that, work that ahead of your cinematographer. Maybe you'll do a deal where the cinematographer will let you take their cards home with you. You'll dump them and then arrange to drop them off at their house 3 days later. Whatever ultimately works best for you and the cinematographer. Just be aware that it's probably going to be something you want to discuss before the day of the shoot so that you can get that video as fast as possible. Again, audio, I wouldn't worry about. That's a relatively simple thing. But the video is getting bigger and bigger every year, and so that definitely needs to be part of it. All right, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about that. Oh, just a real quick, because I got this. Why not? I want to show this real quick. see if I can share that. There we go. Excellent. Just to kind of get a feel for sort of how these on sets things go, right? We got our craft services here. We got, okay, these are horribly out of focus. Look at that. Crew, setting up cast and crew, look, a couple takes. There we go. I do want to say this now, especially since I've got pictures up. I don't know, obviously, how big exactly your cast and crew are going to be. And obviously that it will vary from shoot to shoot to shoot. But just to give you an idea of the scale of Charm City productions, the average crew size for Charm City film so far has been 13 people, and the average cast size has been about 5 people. Again, you may have more, you may have less, that's all part of it, but just be aware that on the day of the set, you will be leading a small army of, on average, 18 people. Those are people who are there to help you, those are people who are there to try to do the best they can, but more than anything else, they're there to follow your vision. And so you need to be really, really clear, really clear on what that vision is. I do want to say one thing a little bit about sort of the end of the day. Unless your script is incredibly short, there is a very, very good chance, and again, this is true for most of the time, there's a very good chance that you are going to be running out of time, and that you are going to have to make difficult choices about what you are going to film and what you're not going to film. I just want everyone to be aware of that. That is usually the case. The advice I would give you is the same advice I got before my first Charm City shoot, which was simply remember the story. You have to tell the story. And if that means you don't film that transition so that you can film this character reaction, then that's the choice you have to make. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to make a film. And so it is your job as the director to make sure that gets done. Okay. I think that's all. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to respond to questions. So if you have a question for me, please type it in the chat. I will then turn on your video and we can go through the questions. So please, anybody. All right, so your question was, well, go ahead, ask your question. Go ahead, please.
My question was if you've had any experience with filming scenes where characters are either singing or playing instruments, because I'm writing a script and part of it is actually a band and they're singing. The song is actually on the radio, so they're kind of lip syncing their own music while playing fake instruments, but like they're actually a band. So it's kind of weird. So I was wondering if you had any experience filming scenes like that.
I can't say that I have, but what I would say is that if I was going to approach something like that is, let me say that one of the more powerful things that you can do just in general when you're filming, most of the time you're going to be filming video and audio at the same time. That is easily the most complicated thing you could do, but that's what you're doing. That's the job. My point is that if you shoot just video only or just audio only, it gets significantly easier. So in your case, I guess it depends on whether or not you want to, I mean, I guess if I was going to play if I was going to film a band singing a song, what I would do is I would play the music out loud while we were filming it, film the band lip singing to that song while it's playing out loud, but only record the video. And then later in post, I'd add the song so that it all synced up. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Because if I'm, the beauty, for example, one of the nice things about shooting just video only is as the director, you can actually direct in the moment. Slow down, speed up, stop, wait for your thing, things you can't do, obviously, if you're recording video and audio at the same time. So yeah, that's the way I'd approach that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, of course. All right, next question. Okay. So while his video, okay, so ask your question, please.
Yeah, so pretty much since my film is being shot at night, and you're saying that we should stagger like call times for actors if like we plan on shooting their scene later in the day. If it's like a day shoot, should that still apply to night? I just didn't know because if it would be inconvenient to call someone at say midnight to come to the shot, or would it make more sense just to invite them all at the very beginning?
Well, okay, so your entire thing is at night, right?
Yeah.
Your entire, yeah, okay. So for that first, you're definitely going to want to do a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. or probably actually more like maybe 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. kind of thing.
Yeah,
Usually
that's
when
what
I'm
I
doing an
figured.
all-night shoot, I will usually show up before dusk because, as I've already pointed out, you're going to get a couple of hours to have to set up anyway. And the best thing in the whole universe is to be sat there with cameras and lights and actors and everybody ready to go, and you're just waiting that 5 more minutes for the sun to finally go down. The reason I say that'd be awesome is because it never happens. But still, the point is you'd want to get an hour jump start on dusk. And that gives you more time on the back end because as soon as the sun comes up, you're done.
Right.
What I would do with your piece, so like, for example, when I'm thinking about your piece, I know like the father, for example, gets almost no screen time. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I would do in your case is I'd bring your son and daughter and have them there for the whole day because, frankly, they're going to be the meat of the piece. And then consciously bring dad in at like 1 in the morning, 2 in the. Well, basically, what I would usually do is I usually bring them in during when I expect lunch to be. So if the actor is a little bit early, they get a free meal. If they're a little bit late, it's okay because we're still moving through lunch. You know what I mean? So I usually invite them specifically for lunch. So I bring son and daughter in at an hour after your crew called time, and dad would come in after lunch.
Okay.
And hey, if
Oh,
you
go
end
ahead.
up losing the daughter early, let's say you get 2/3 of the way through the done, and maybe you finish before lunch with her, maybe you don't finish with lunch with her, but you can, once you wrap her, you can let her go. Son is pretty much, he's the star, so he'll be in pretty much everything, so he's there all day no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess based off of that, most of my stuff is indoors except for like the one little bit where son drives away. Um, where would
Mhm.
you, I mean, obviously, you be my AD and then talk to cinematographer Kelly, who's and also in the chat. We'll figure that out more, but I don't know if you had any early thoughts about that or not, based on like time of night and
I
all
will.
that.
Well, okay. In terms of like what would look good for the outside stuff, I would probably defer a little bit to your cinematographer
Okay.
on this. But in terms of the inside shot, I will say that personally, in my experience, my favorite thing is to shoot indoors with blacked out windows because then you don't have to care about the sun at
Okay.
all. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's day or night outside. So what I would probably do for all your indoor night stuff is black out the windows, and then that way you have 100% complete control over lighting, and you can make it look like whatever you want.
Okay.
Outside, that's a weird thing because you definitely want to make sure that you do it at dark, but at the same time, the only one in the scene is the sun. So the temptation would be to push him towards the back, but not so back that you have to worry about running out of sunlight. I mean, running into sunlight, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean,
So
I'll say if we
probably
were,
sun would be done after lunch, probably.
I'll say,
Go
I'll
ahead.
say if we were to black out the windows. I mean, like I said, I could talk to this with Kelly later. But we could stagger it where like the call time is like early afternoon and then it ends at nighttime, and then just finish the
Yeah.
like outdoor shots around like the end of the shoot.
You're starting to get it. Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
Okay.
The bottom line is you get 12 hours, just what makes the most sense. So yeah, actually, I think you make a point. I think maybe something more like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, just to make sure that, so when you're done, and what I mean specifically is you've done everything indoors, you've wrapped with the daughter, you've wrapped with the father, they're gone, they're done. And now it's just you, and frankly, probably a limited crew too, since you're talking about driving shots, it's always a little bit different. Usually you scale down your crew tremendously because you only put so many people in a couple of cars. So at that point, we'd also get rid of a fair amount of the crew and just have enough to do just now the son in the car driving around kind of thing, and then be the last bit of the evening. Potential.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Cool. Yeah, that makes
Good.
sense. Yeah.
Listen, let me say in terms of that sort of stuff, like, hey, would it makes more sense to schedule it early or late or whatever? It's a big part of what your first AD is supposed to do. Um, you know, and yes, that'll often usually be me, quite frankly, but is to go, okay, well, what's the best way to sort of like maximize this, minimize this? I don't want talent to be longer than I don't want them to be there longer than they have to, but at the same time, I don't want to sit here and have to just wait because an actor hasn't shown up yet. So you figure out ways you can to like use them as fast as you can and then let them go, or wait, don't have them come in right away, have them come in later, that sort of thing. Questions in the chat box, give them to me. There we go.
Sorry about
Ask your question, please. That's okay.
that.
We're all learning. We're learning.
Not used to Zoom. Anyway, is there a possibility that we have 2 cameras, or is there only one at our disposal?
We can certainly do 2 cameras. I will say that in the past, it has generally not sped things up as much as directors hope they would. But yes, we have access to 2 cameras. Do be aware that they're not going to be the same type of camera. So that does mean that you will have to do a little bit of extra work in post to make the cameras sync up. And not much. It really shouldn't be that much of a difference, but just be aware they will be 2 different types of cameras.
I was just curious because I don't know, a couple of the things that I've been working on, is it quite possible that there could be a second unit and a second unit director?
Oh, you mean in that sense?
First.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant 2 cameras on the same one scene.
Well, 3-4-2, and I like to do that, especially with close-ups, because I can knock off both close-ups at the same time, over the shoulders, or close-ups. Masters I can do with 1 camera, but if I want to do a second unit where I can knock that out and knock it out faster, then that's what I was thinking.
I think Dave's got an opinion.
I've seen that.
Sir?
I've seen that sort of be attempted before, and if the two units are in completely different locations, that could probably work. But if both units are in the same house, they're just going to get in each other's ways, especially when one set's trying to roll and the other set's making a bunch of noise, moving stuff around and chatting.
No, I was definitely thinking in terms of second unit somewhere else.
Okay.
They're running the horses while I'm doing the scene. I'm just joking about that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's the Indians that I want second unit.
What I would say generally on that is that we haven't tried it before. It's not necessarily something that can't be done. And certainly if what you're talking about picking up is like exclusively B-roll type stuff, I honestly don't think that'd be much of a problem. In terms of like actually having separate scenes that are being acted and directed, I guess that depends on how much faith you'd have in that other person to sort of like give up directing to whoever that person was going to be. But certainly doable, absolutely.
Look, I mean, certainly there's a director that could do second unit, even if they have dialogue. But like if I've got a dance scene going down the street, that could definitely be shot by a second unit. I'm just,
Mm-hmm. 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 It isn't something it's not something we've done before, but it's not something I'm against trying. Absolutely not at all. We just have to sort of work out the details of that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Cool. Next, anybody else? Going. All right, I'm assuming that's it for questions. Excellent. Thank you all for attending, and I guess I will wrap it up. Yeah.